The maintenance log for Bay 7 showed a coolant leak at 0347, and that was why Seo Yun was elbow deep in a conduit when the war started. Not elbow deep metaphorically. Literally. Her right arm had vanished into a tangle of polymer tubing and pressure seals, and she was trying to reach a cracked fitting with her fingers because the wrench that would have made this easy was sitting on her bunk 2 decks up. Classic. 11 years in the Republic of Earth Navy, decorated 3 times, and she still forgot tools. The RENS Chungmu hummed around her. It always hummed. The ship was 3 kilometers long and carried a complement of 4,000 humans plus the kind of firepower that made planetary governments reconsider their life choices. It was, by most metrics, one of the most dangerous things humanity had ever built. It smelled like recycled air and machine oil and the ghost of someone's instant ramen from the galley 2 corridors over. Seo Yun loved it the way people love things that are terrible and familiar at the same time. She found the cracked fitting, wrapped her fingers around it, started to turn. The ship lurched. Not like normal maneuvering. Not the gentle list you felt when the Chungma changed vector. This was a full-body violence, the kind that meant something outside had decided the Chungmu needed to stop existing. She slammed her shoulder into the conduit housing, heard rather than felt something crack in her upper arm, and the coolant fitting she'd been gripping snapped clean off and sprayed blue glycerol across her face. The emergency lighting came on. Red, which was the universe's way of being annoyingly on the nose about things. She pulled her arm free, assessed the damage in about 2 seconds, shoulder bruised, arm possibly cracked but functional, face sticky with coolant that would definitely irritate her skin later, and started moving before the intercom even finished its automated collision warning. General quarters, someone said over the ship. Wide channel. It was Lieutenant Bach, who had the kind of voice that sounded professionally calm even when, presumably, he was internally screaming. All hands to battle stations. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Seo Yun was already running. Understood. What she pieced together over the next 40 minutes, between sealing herself into her damage control station and listening to fragmented comm traffic, was this. The Chungmu had dropped out of transit near the Vekari expanse. Routine patrol, nothing special, and found something waiting. Not enemy ships in the way humanity had expected. Something else. Something large that did not match any catalog profile, and had fired first with weapons that the ship's AI was still trying to classify. The first shot had taken out 2 of the Chungmu's secondary drive nodes and a chunk of the port weapons array. The second shot, which came 8 minutes later, took out a lot more. Seo Yun spent the battle doing the unsexy work that kept ships alive, patching conduits, rerouting power, talking a 19-year-old technician named Ju Han through sealing a hull breach with his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the foam applicator. She did not see the alien vessel. She did not see the battle as a whole. She heard it in pieces, the ship shuddering, systems going offline, Captain Huang's voice giving orders in the flat, precise tone that meant he was conserving cognitive resources for problem-solving. Then things got very quiet. The Chungmu's guns went silent. Engineering, said someone who was not Lieutenant Bach and did not sound professionally calm. We have lost main drive power. We are drifting. Enemy contact is a pause. A long pause. Enemy contact has ceased fire. Seo Yun looked at Juhan. Juhan looked at her. Does that mean we won? He asked. No idea, she said, which was honest. Understood. They found out later that they had not won. Exactly. What they had done was survive, which in the circumstances was almost the same thing. The alien vessel, immense, dark, shaped like something that had evolved rather than been designed, all asymmetric curves and surfaces that absorbed light, had stopped firing. It sat alongside the crippled Chungmu for 6 hours. 6 hours in which nobody on either side did anything. Because doing anything seemed likely to restart a situation everyone had just barely survived. And then it had hailed them. Seo Yun wasn't in the room when that happened. She was still in engineering, helping restore partial power to the secondary systems, when word filtered down. The aliens had transmitted something. The Chungmu's translation AI, which had been trained on every known sapient language in explored space, all 47 of them, had needed 4 hours to produce anything coherent. What it produced was, "We did not know what you were. We do not know what you are. We would speak to your kind." Captain Huang's response, which Seo Yun thought showed admirable restraint given the circumstances, was, "We are willing to talk." That was the beginning. Underscore 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 underscore. 3 weeks later, the Chungmu was under tow. She'd never fly under her own power again. The drive core was too far gone, and Seo Yun was standing in a corridor outside the makeshift diplomatic suite, waiting for nothing in particular, eating a nutrient bar that tasted like compressed chalk and disappointment. She was waiting because Lieutenant Commander Park had told her to be available, which in practice meant standing around feeling useless while actual diplomats did actual diplomacy. Seo Yun was there because she'd led the team that had restored communications, which meant the diplomatic corps considered her vaguely useful in a technical capacity. She found this less flattering than they intended. The door to the diplomatic suite opened. One of the aliens walked out. She'd known intellectually that Som E of the alien delegation had come aboard. She hadn't actually seen one up close. The ship's briefings had included images, but images were inadequate. The being was roughly bipedal, 2 legs, 2 primary limbs, a head that sat on a neck that was too long by human standards, but the resemblance to anything human stopped there. Its skin, or the thing that served as skin, was a dark iridescent gray that shifted color very slightly when it moved. It was taller than her by about 40 centimeters. It moved with a deliberateness that made her think of something conserving energy, something accustomed to long stillness. It also appeared to be lost. It stood in the corridor, looking in both directions with a stillness that she'd already started to associate with alien confusion, and something in its posture. She couldn't have explained how she read it, but she did, communicated uncertainty. She finished chewing her nutrient bar. She should probably get someone qualified, someone with a diplomatic credential or at least a clean uniform. Instead, she said, "Hey, do you need help?" She immediately questioned this decision. The alien turned toward her. Its eyes, 4 of them, arranged differently than she'd expected, 2 forward-facing and 2 lateral, moved across her face in a way that felt like being read. The translation device it wore at its chest, small and silver, produced a sound that might have been language and might have been static, and then said in the flat mechanical tones of machine translation, "I am seeking the nourishment provision area." Seo Yun blinked. The galley. This word is unknown to my translation matrix. It's where we eat. Food. She mimed eating, which she immediately felt embarrassed about, and then mentally told herself to stop being embarrassed because the being in front of her had traveled between star systems and probably understood the concept of gesture. "Ah," said the alien. The translation device produced the word with a slight dela. Why that she'd learned meant the original language was being simplified significantly. "Yes, the galley. I was informed it exists in this section of the vessel." "It does. I can take you there." The alien made a gesture she couldn't read. "You are an engineer," it said. Statement, not question. She glanced down at her coveralls, the tool belt, the smear of dried coolant she hadn't fully cleaned off her left forearm. "Yeah," she said. "Seo Yun. You." Another pause. The translation device made a series of sounds that were clearly a name and clearly untranslatable. Then it said, "You may designate me Vorin. This is the closest phonetic approximation your language matrix has produced." "Vorin," she repeated. "He." She defaulted to he, which she'd been told was not accurate, but was the closest approximation the diplomatic briefings had settled on, regarded her with those 4 eyes. He smelled, she noticed, like ozone and something organic, like rain on warm stone. Not unpleasant. "The galley," she said. "Right. Come on." Underscore 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 underscore. The thing about Vorin, which she figured out over the 20 minutes it took to walk to the galley and then back, because the alien food synthesizers the delegation had brought aboard were in a different section and he'd misread the ship's map, was that he asked questions constantly. Not diplomatic questions. Not strategic questions. Small ones. Why was this corridor painted gray? What was that sound? Ventilation cycling. Why did humans need so much light when many species managed on far less? Did the material of her coveralls have significance, or was it arbitrary? She answered all of them, which surprised her, because she was generally not a person who enjoyed talking. The gray is because gray hides wear and tear better than other colors, she said. The sound is the ventilation. We need the light because our eyes evolved for daylight on a planet with a fairly bright sun. The coveralls are practical, not significant. T. On my vessel, Vorin said, the corridors are dark. The crew has adapted to low-light perception over many generations. That sounds inconvenient for visitors. Your vessel's light levels are painful for some of my companions. They are managing. She stopped walking. Is it painful for you? Less so. I have spent time on other species' vessels. A pause. Not human vessels. What are human vessels like? Compared to what you expected. He was quiet for long enough that she wondered if she'd asked something rude. Then loud. Warm. Your vessel smells of biological processes more than most. There are many small imperfections that have been repaired rather than replaced. Another pause. It feels inhabited. Seo-yun thought about the Chungmu, currently being towed with half her systems dark. The scratches on the corridor walls. The misaligned deck plating in Bay 3 that had been that way for 6 years, and everyone just stepped over it. The smell of someone's ramen. Yeah, she said. It is. Underscore. She saw him 4 more times over the following week, and each time was technically accidental, except that the Chungmu was a very large ship and running into the same individual 4 times suggested that at least one of them was engineering the accidents. She did not examine which one. The second time, he was standing in an observation bay, watching stars. She needed to check a sensor array in that section, and she was going to just do her work and leave. She really was. But he turned and saw her and said, Seo-yun, with that translation device delay, and she stopped. Vorin, she said. Talking to the stars. Orienting, he said. I find unfamiliar space disorienting. I look for known star patterns. A pause. There are very few from this position. She came and stood beside him. Not too close. She looked out at the stars. You're far from home. Yes. She'd grown up in Busan. She knew what it felt like to look at an ocean. And think about distance. Me too, kind of. Not that I live on Earth anymore. But sometimes I look at the stars and try to find the direction of the solar system. Like that helps somehow. Does it? Not really, she admitted. But it's something to do with your eyes when you don't know what to do with your hands. Something in his posture shifted. She was getting better at reading him. In a rough way, the way you get better at reading anyone when you pay attention. The shift said something like amusement, or the closest equivalent. Your species, he said, is very strange. Yeah, she said. We are. Underscore. The third time, she was eating lunch alone in a small crew lounge that was usually empty at that hour, and he came in looking for her specifically, which she knew because he said, I was looking for you. The directness of it caught her off guard. She had a fork halfway to her mouth. She put it down. Why? The diplomatic team has questions about the Chungmu's weapons systems. They want an engineering perspective. You were recommended. That's okay. That's just work. Yes. He didn't leave. She looked at him. He looked at her, all 4 eyes, in that reading you way. She'd stopped finding it unsettling around day 3. Now it just felt like being paid attention to, which was its own slightly alarming experience. Do you eat? She asked. I have, he said. Our synthesizers produced something adequate. Do you want to sit down? I'm almost done. He sat. He didn't have a tray. He folded his primary limbs on the table in a posture she'd started to think of as relaxed and watched her eat, which most humans would have found rude, but which she'd figured out was just how he was. Attentive. Watching. She'd met humans who made her feel invisible. Vorin made her feel like the most interesting thing in a room, which was disconcerting in a different way. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. Why did your ship fire first? She regretted it immediately. Too blunt. Too direct. She was the wrong person for diplomatic anything. But he didn't withdraw or deflect. We had received intelligence, he said slowly, the translator struggling slightly with his cadence, that a vessel matching your profile had attacked a Kethvel research station near the outer boundary. We now know that intelligence was incorrect, or deliberately falsified. A pause. 200 of your crew were wounded. 112 died, she said. The silence was heavy. She watched something move across his face, his expressive surface, she'd learned to call it, because face wasn't quite right. Something that registered weight. Recognition of weight. I am sorry, he said, which came out slightly flat through the translator, but which she believed. Yeah, she said. Me too. Understood. The fourth time was not accidental, even a little bit. He sent a message through the ship's communication system, formally, addressed to her crew identification number, asking if she would be willing to walk with him. She read it 3 times, and then sent back. Yes, when? They walked for 2 hours. Through sections of the ship, she knew the way she knew her own hands, and she told him things. About how the Chungmu worked, about the people on it, about the battle, about finding the cracked fitting at 0347. And he told her things in return. About his vessel, the Drev Kasa, which in his language meant something close to the patience required for great distances. About the species he called the Kethvel, who had been feeding false intelligence to various powers in the expanse, seemingly to cause exactly this kind of accidental violence. About his own role on his ship, which was roughly equivalent to what humans would call a senior navigator, except that it also involved a ceremonial function he found difficult to translate. Something like, he said, pausing while the translator processed, a keeper of orientation. N. Someone responsible for knowing where we are relative to everything important. That's not just navigation, she said. That's almost philosophical. The distinction in your language, he said, between practical functions and philosophical ones is interesting to me. On my world, they are considered aspects of the same thing. She thought about this. Who taught you that? About our language's distinctions. I have been studying your language since the first day of contact. Another pause. I find I prefer it when the translation device is less necessary. Her heart did something she decided not to acknowledge. Understood. The Chungmu reached the station at Vekari 2 days later. Things accelerated, the way things do when circumstances drag everyone toward decisions. The diplomatic talks had produced a fragile framework, not peace, exactly, because they hadn't been at war, exactly, but an acknowledgement of mutual existence and a tentative desire to not blow each other up again. There were agreements to exchange information about the Kethvel. There were protocols for future contact. There were also, because humans are humans, competing factions about what all of this meant and what to do about it, and meetings that Seo Yun was not senior enough to attend, and a general sense that events were moving faster than anyone's ability to process them. She found herself on the observation deck again, at 0200, which was when she usually went when she couldn't sleep. The battered port array was visible from here, the broken sections catching station light. She'd helped repair some of it. Not all of it was reparable. Vorin found her 20 minutes later. She didn't hear him coming. His species moved quietly, something about the structure of their lower limbs, but she felt his presence before she saw it, in the shift of air, in the slight change in the smell of the room. You could not sleep either, she said. My people do not sleep in the Wa. Warriors do, he said. But I have periods of reduced activity where I prefer not to be engaged. He came to stand beside her, closer than usual. I have been told your delegation departs in 37 hours. Yeah. And my vessel has been cleared for departure in 39. Yeah. The stars were very still. The station lights made them harder to see, the way it always did near inhabited places. Seo Yun, he said, I would like to tell you something. She turned to look at him. In the low light, his skin shifted through colors she couldn't name. Dark blues, deep greens, something almost violet. She'd noticed that his color shifts correlated to his emotional state. In rough ways, she'd been building a private, unscientific map of This particular range of colors she'd only seen once before, briefly, when he'd spoken about home. I am listening, she said. When I look for known star patterns to orient myself, he said, carefully. I have found that in this unfamiliar region of space, you have become a reference point. She stood very still. I do not know if this translates, he said. I am not certain the concept moves cleanly between our languages. But the navigator's function, the keeper of orientation, it means that everything is understood relative to something else. Something fixed. Something that helps you know where you are. He paused. You have become that for me. She looked at the broken port array. She looked at the stars. She thought about being elbow deep in a conduit at 0347 while the world changed around her. She thought about how she'd given up trying to figure out which of them was engineering their accidental meetings, because the answer didn't matter, and also the answer was both of them. I'm not great at this, she said. This, she gestured vaguely between them, saying things. I have noticed, he said, and the color of him did something that she'd learned to read as warmth. I don't know how this works, she said. Practically, what this even is, what it can be. No, he agreed. Neither do I. We live in completely different parts of space. We're different species. I don't even fully understand your biology. You do not need to understand my biology. That's easy to say. Yes, he said. It is. I am saying it anyway. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. She turned to face him fully. Up close, the color shifts were more visible, and she watched them without trying to look like she was watching, which was difficult because he was directly in front of her. Is what you're describing? She stopped. Started again. When you say reference point, is that? In my culture, he said, the term has additional weight that I am trying to convey. A reference point is not simply useful. It is significant. It is something you return to. Something in her chest did a thing that she was not going to call by its proper name yet, because it was 0200 and she was tired, and they were leaving in 37 hours, and she needed to be a professional about this. Okay, she said. Okay. He repeated, with the slight delay that meant the translator had processed it and offered several interpretations and selected the one that fit context. I don't want to say goodbye in 37 hours, she said. I'm saying that as a factual statement. I'm not good at elegant phrasing. I understood you, he said. Understood. The 37 hours pass the way time passes when you're aware of it passing, too fast and too slow simultaneously, and full of ordinary interruptions. She had 3 equipment briefings. She ate 4 meals. She repaired a secondary power coupling that had been complaining since the battle. Zhu Han, the 19-year-old with the shaky hands, found her to say thank you, and she was surprised to discover she was glad he did. She and Vorin met twice more, both times deliberately, both times in the observation bay. They didn't talk about departure. They talked about the Kethvel, about what the framework might mean, about a star system he'd mapped in his first years as a navigator that contained a planet he thought might be something like what she described as beautiful. They talked about the word beautiful, which did not have a clean equivalent in his language, and what each version meant. He told her that his species conveyed certain kinds of regard through a gesture she had no equivalent for, a specific positioning of one's primary limbs relative to the other person, a slight incline of the head, a stillness. He demonstrated it, carefully, and she watched. What does it mean? She asked. Approximately, he said. I am glad you exist. She thought about this for a long time. Then she said, we have something similar. It's less formal. And she reached out and put her hand over one of his primary limbs, the one closest to her. It was warm. The texture was different than she'd expected, less smooth, more like, she couldn't find the comparison, like touching something alive in a way she'd never touched before. He didn't move. His color shifted into that range she'd been trying to name for 2 weeks. I'm glad you exist too, she said. Is that enough for now? Yes, he said. That is enough. Underscore. The RENS Chungmu crew transferred to a relief vessel at hour 34. The goodbyes were long and somewhat chaotic because 4,000 humans dispersing across a station is chaotic by definition. Captain Huang shook her hand and told her her report on the communications restoration was exemplary, which was the most enthusiastic thing he had said to her in 11 years, and she decided to consider that a good omen. Seo Yun had her personal kit, her tool belt, and 3 things she'd picked up over the last 3 weeks that she hadn't had before. A small iridescent chip from the Drev Kasa's hull, given to her by one of Voron's fellow crew members, who had presented it with a formal gravity that suggested it meant something. A new entry in her private log that was not strictly professional, and a contact frequency. Not a human frequency. Not something the standard communication networks would carry without relay infrastructure that didn't currently exist and would take months to build. That was going to be a problem. She stood on the station dock, kit over her shoulder, and thought about it in the practical way she thought about engineering problems. Problems had solutions. Sometimes the solutions were inconvenient and took time and required resources you didn't currently have. That didn't make them unsolvable. It made them projects. A message came through on her personal comm. It was from Voron. It was, characteristically, very direct. The relay infrastructure does not exist. I am told it would require 4 to 7 months to construct, dependent on political cooperation. I intend to advocate for the political cooperation. She typed back, me too. I'm better with hardware than politics, but I'll figure it out. His response came after a longer pause than usual. I know you will. You repaired your ship's communications with a conduit fitting in 4 hours. She laughed, actually laughed, in the middle of the crowded dock, and a passing petty officer gave her a look. She typed, I had help. He replied, yes. I know that too. Underscore. Seven months later, Seo Yun was lying under a communications relay station on a platform near Vekari, 70 meters above the station's main deck, replacing a misaligned transceiver coupling that was the reason the new relay network kept dropping signal. It was a small, annoying problem. It smelled up here like hot metal and the particular sterility of space-adjacent environments. Her back hurt. She found the coupling, wrapped her fingers around it, and started to turn. Her comm chirped. She did not fall off the platform. She did close her eyes for 1 second and remind herself that she was a PR professional, and professionals did not drop tools because of comm chirps. She finished tightening the coupling, crawled back to the maintenance hatch, climbed down the ladder, and answered. I'm receiving you, she said. There was a slight delay, longer than the old translator delay. This was the relay delay, signal bouncing through the new infrastructure, both sides of it not quite adequate, but adequate enough. I am receiving you, said Voron. His voice came through with a slight distortion at the edges that she was already learning to hear past. The relay is functioning. Yeah, she said. I just fixed the coupling. Of course you did. That delay again. How is the station? Cold. Loud. I'm fixing a lot of things. She looked at the relay tower above her, the new components she and a team of engineers from 3 different species had spent 4 months arguing about and installing. How's the Drev Casa? Dark. Quiet. Navigating. A pause. We are 4 days from the Kethvel boundary. The political cooperation you mentioned has produced a joint observation mission. I heard. I wrote the spec for 2 of the relay stations on that route. I know, he said. I recognized your design choices. She stood on the platform, above the station, with the stars visible through the transparencies, and felt something settle in her chest. Not the dramatic feeling of that night in the observation bay, but something quieter. Something like a reference point. Voron, she said. Seo Yun. I found the direction of the solar system from here, she said. I've been finding it every morning. You know how that is. Something to do with your eyes, he said, when you don't know what to do with your hands. Yeah, she said. Like that. The relay hummed. The signal was not perfect. It was going to need work. The whole network was going to need continuous work. This was not a solved problem, but a managed one. But it was there, and it carried his voice, and she could hear in the hape of the delay that he was in good range, and the connection was stable. For days, she said. I'll be here. I know, he said. I am orienting accordingly. She smiled at the transparencies, at the stars, at the direction of the solar system she'd been finding every morning like a small private ritual. Somewhere out there, The Drevkasa was moving through dark space with its careful asymmetric hull and its low lights and its navigator who kept track of important things. She thought about 37 hours, about 0347 and a cracked fitting, about how the war that wasn't quite a war had ended with a framework that wasn't quite peace, but was becoming something, slowly, the way things become things when people on both sides of an incomprehensible distance decide they'd prefer to figure it out. She picked up her tool belt. She had 3 more couplings to check before the end of the shift. She went back to work.